After several weeks of dealing with issues of ritual purity or of purity of food, this week we move forward and we will talk about holiness, as we are commanded to be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Today we will talk about faith, religion, and ceremony and discuss the practical aspects of life as our Torah portion answers the question, how can we practically live a life of holiness? It gives us examples of such a life, and we'll get to them later. But first, I would like to speak about the interesting combination of the words decrees and laws, which appear more than 20 times in the Bible and several times in today's reading. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. The same pair of words also appear in the prophetic writings, like in our weekly Haftarah from Ezekiel, chapter 20, verse 11. I gave them my decrees and made known to them my laws, by which a person who obeys them will live. What are they, these laws and decrees? And what is the meaning of the phrase, live by them, which often comes right after the mentioning of laws and decrees? According to Judaism, there are 613 commandments in the Bible, with the first and immediate division into two groups, to do and not to do commandments. The second division of the commandments is between laws and decrees. These are two different categories. Laws are commandments with a clear reason and purpose. Their benefit is obvious. They are part of any legal regulations that are necessary in every society, such as the prohibition to murder, to steal, or to give a false testimony. These are clear and logical. Such laws exist in every civilized society or country. And even if they're not exactly the same, then similar arrangements are in place. For example, instead of appoint a king over you, then every country has an elect president or prime minister, but the principle is the same. Now, decrees, on the other hand, are commandments without a clear logical reason behind them. In this category, we include the ritual commandments, the regulations between people and God, and everything else that is not part of the civil law. Commandments like building a booth, a sukkah, during the Feast of Tabernacle. If you do not belong to the people who were redeemed from Egypt, and unless it is part of your collective memory, such a commandment to build a booth will have no meaning or reason for you. Only in connection to Israel, this commandment has spiritual, religious, and even national meaning. Also the Shabbat, repeated again in our portion, has no social meaning. It is related to the story of creation. God rested on the seventh day, so he sanctified the seventh day. Here as well, the meaning of the Shabbat is religious. It's biblical, but it is not part of civil law. Now, I am not saying that these commandments are less important. Not at all. They protected our people in exile and kept us from assimilation. I'm just saying that these commandments are not kept and not enforced anywhere outside of the Torah observant world. These commandments are called decrees. The laws that are similar to the civil laws of society are meant to add moral qualities to our life. They are meant to build a better society, better relationships between people. The decrees are meant to give us holiness, to bring us closer to God. The laws and decrees complete each other, and together, the two groups cover our relationships with each other and with God. In my opinion, this is the reason why when Yeshua was asked, which is the greatest and most important commandment, he mentioned the two equally important. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. When Yeshua is asked, what is the greatest and most important commandment? He gave his answer in two parts. The first, between man and God. And the second, between man and his neighbor. If we are working in both directions, if we have love and the desire to serve God, as well as love and the desire to serve those around us, to help other people, then we fulfill the entire Torah. Because the Torah is dealing with these two questions. Proper relationships between people and how to bring people closer to God. One of the questions that always come up in every religious dispute is about a good person who is always good and trying to help others. And why isn't it enough? The answer is simple. That person keeps only half the requirements. He is keeping the laws. But what about the decrees that are supposed to bring people closer to God, that give people holiness? The same claim could be addressed to people of faith, those who are religious, who keep everything between man and God, keep all the religious requirements. Is that enough? And the answer is the same. Such a person only keeps half the requirements. What about the laws that are supposed to bring us closer to other people and give us holiness? What is it that gives holiness to people? This is exactly what our Torah portion is talking about. It lays out before us everything we have to do. It is forbidden to steal, forbidden to lie. We're obligated to save a person in danger. Our court system must be just. We must keep the Shabbat. It is forbidden to put an obstacle before the blind. And another additional 50 commandments, all of which can be categorized as the requirements for holiness, when the most important and fundamental among them, according to Yeshua, is love your neighbor as yourself. In his first letter, Peter is asking us, the believers, to be holy in all aspects of our life. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. When thinking about holiness or a holy person, we usually imagine someone who is separated from the world, who lives in a desert, or a monk deep in meditation on a high mountain in Tibet, or a rabbi whose life is completely dedicated to study the Torah. But this is not what Peter is talking about. On the contrary, be holy in all you do, means in the way you live. A person is asked to keep holiness in the very stir of life's activity, actively participating in it. Peter quotes two passages from Leviticus. The first from chapter 11, that deals with the most basic aspects of life, with a kitchen and food. Holiness is not limited to the temple or to a certain religious ceremony. Holiness exists in every place, and in every time, and in every person, and even in food. After a long list of creatures we are not allowed to eat, comes God's order. Be holy because I am holy. This order comes in connection with a prohibition to eat defiled food. And in our Torah portion, the concept of holiness and the demand to be holy appears again. This is where Peter's second quote comes from. The demand to be holy in all you do comes from our weekly portion. To be holy means not to take advantage of your neighbor, not to hate your brother in your heart, not to slander. It means to reap from your field, but leave its fringes for the poor and needy. To be holy means not to put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. And who is the blind? It could be a person with a disability who literally cannot see with his eyes. In such a case, putting a stumbling block before him would be a really cruel joke. It would be pure evil. But at the same time, a blind man can be someone who is lacking knowledge or information. And our sages already said that someone without knowledge, someone who comes to you for advice or a recommendation, is like a person who is blind. He is blind in a certain area, and he's asking which way to choose, what decision to make. And we must be careful in what we advise them, as the Bible tells us to fear God. In this context, the blind is a person in trouble who needs a good advice. And if we mislead the one who trusts us for personal gain, it is if we put a stumbling block in the street in front of the blind. This verse speaks of taking advantage of others for personal gain. For example, the horrible stories of companies that are selling appliances, guarantees, and services to the elderly, charging them extra and taking advantage of their trust and lack of knowledge, while knowing with certainty that they are giving bad advice, misleading, overcharging the elderly, all for the sake of greed and personal gain. This is an example of placing an obstacle before the blind. And the fear of God is written exactly for these kinds of wrong practices. We should be very careful not to do so. How do we keep holiness? According to the New Testament and according to our Torah portion, we ought to keep holiness in every aspect of our life, in our personal and family life, in agriculture, at work, and in business. The holiness is not kept from outside, from afar, but from within the activities of life. Paul summarizes Yeshua's teaching about the two most important commandments of the Torah, saying that everything boils down to love. If you love your neighbor, love the person next to you, you fulfill the purpose of the Torah. In a way, the entire Torah is fulfilled in one commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Paul summarizes the whole Torah with these verses. Let no debt remain outstanding except that continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you should not murder, you should not steal, you should not covet, and whatever other commandments there may be are summed up in this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is a fulfillment of the law. All the commandments concerning people and their neighbors are included in the verse, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we need to understand the meaning of the phrase, live by them, in connection with the laws and decrees. In this Torah portion, God warns us not to follow in the ways of Egypt or the ways of the local inhabitants of Canaan, who did not keep purity or holiness, who corrupted and defiled the land. And because of this, God drove them out. God warns the people of Israel and us today, if we want to be worthy of living in Israel, in the Holy Land, we have to keep the Word of God. All this appears in the conclusion of our Torah portion. Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nation I am going to drive out before you, because they did all these things. I abhorred them, but I said to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has set you apart from the nations. This text is talking about the continuity of the nation and of the family, about the duty to keep the commandments, but also about passing the Word of God to the next generation, so that they will continue to live and prosper in the land of Israel. I would like to conclude with a statement of Yeshua. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Shabbat Shalom.